Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Yeah. You shall be holy, for I, Adonai your God, am holy. This emphatic declaration lies at the very center of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. It comes in the middle book of Leviticus and the middle of that book of Leviticus. So it's right in the center of the Torah. And in many ways, it could be seen as the ultimate charge to the Jewish people, the ultimate purpose and goal of Judaism, of living a Jewish life. You shall be holy, for I, Adonai your God, am holy. But notice that God does not say you are a holy people because I'm holy. Rather, you shall be a holy people because I'm holy. The statement, therefore, implies that we're not there yet. It implies that we're commanded to strive to become holy. But how do we do that? By following the commandments that God has given us, by keeping our part of our contract with God, by faithfully living a Jewish life, including the ritual practices that define us as a people and that enhance our relationship with God, but also by faithfully observing the ethical teachings of our tradition, instructing us to be kind and compassionate to others, to be fair, honest, and just. If we do all of these things, we can in fact become a holy people. So according to Yeshayahu Leibowitz, a famous commentator from Israel, that was the big mistake that Korach made. In our Eitz Chaim Chumashim, at the bottom of page 861, in our commentary, it says that Leibowitz sees Korach's demagoguery exposed in the claim that all the community are holy. That is, that we've already achieved our goal and nothing more needs to be demanded of us. The Torah's position is that all of the community is challenged to become holy. And that's where Yeshayahu Leibowitz cites the verse from Leviticus, and he says this is a future goal, not a present boast. Several chapters after our Torah portion this morning, in the book of Numbers, chapter 26, we learn that the sons of Korach did not die. And so here Leibowitz comments that Korach's children means future generations of Jews who make the same claim that he did, that we are already a holy people simply by being born Jewish. And Leibowitz says that such people exist in every generation, claiming that just being Jewish is somehow genetically making us superior to everyone else. You can almost be guaranteed that anyone who claims to be holy is certainly not. Of course, most of us don't go around saying, I'm a holy person and you're not a holy person. We're not so obvious about it. But I'm sure, on the other hand, we can all identify people who act as though they are holier than thou. And we also probably know people with various prejudices, believing that this race or that creed or this nationality is inherently inferior to our own. Some Jews, I'm sad to say, seem to believe that being Jewish is a genetically superior condition. The Goyim, the non-Jews, are supposedly somehow inferior. Now, I imagine that this idea might have crept into some sectors of our society as a result of the constant assaults that we experienced in the diaspora over the centuries, the constant taunts that we were actually inferior to others in the countries in which we lived. But nevertheless, it's not a Jewish idea. It's kind of revolting, really, and even childish. It's kind of like 2 5-year-olds arguing, I'm smarter than you are, I'm better, I'm stronger, whatever. It's like, we're not 5-year-olds. It's also, according to Leibowitz, the claim that Korach made, and we know what happened to him. Judaism is rather designed to challenge us to try and become holy. The more we fulfill our mission, our duties, and our responsibilities to God, and strive to make the world a better place, the closer we come to becoming a holy people. So it's interesting that the Midrash, the rabbis, imagine that Korach argues with Moses over 2 mitzvot in particular. At the end of last week's Torah portion, the last thing we read was about the fringes on the corners of our garments, and we read that there's supposed to be a thread of blue on these fringes, and you'll notice that most of us don't have a blue thread in our fringes. So that's because for centuries we seem to have forgotten how to make that blue thread, how to make that dye. And so rather than get it wrong, we decided not to make it blue at all and just leave them all white. About 100 years ago, Rabbi Isaac Herzog, the first rabbi of the state of Israel, wrote a dissertation in which he argued that the dye was traditionally made from the Murex trunculus snail, for all you marine biologists out there. The Murex trunculus snail, which produces a certain kind of a dye that produces the blue or purple, which was known in the ancient world as royal blue or royal purple, so called because these snails, you had to mine a lot of snails in order to get enough dye to make the blue threads, and to get a whole garment, a whole robe made out of blue or purple meant you had to be royalty, or you had to have a lot of money. And so anyway, that's the way it was done, and then we forgot about it, and now we don't do it. Except that there's now a factory in Israel called Patil Techelet, which means thread of blue, and they produce the blue threads for your tzitzit. So if you want to order it from their website, you can cut off the ones that come in your commercial talitot and go to the website, find out how to tie the knots and make your own. For those of you who follow archaeology, by the way, there was an article just published a couple of days ago in Times of Israel about a Murex trunculus fabric dyeing factory that existed just south of Haifa 3,000 years ago. They've been digging around and finding more about this thing. It was just an article again about it in the paper a couple of days ago. It predates Israelite conquest, right? So this was owned by the Phoenicians. Looks like it might have been conquered by the Israelites later. It was a very big money-making industry, and so the Israelites may have conquered it to support the economy in the country. In any case, they now found one of these factories, and you can read about it in the Times of Israel. But getting back to our midrash, the rabbis imagine that Korach said to Moses about this talit and the thread of blue, what happens if you dyed your entire garment blue? What if you have a whole blue robe? Do you still need to put a thread of blue on the corners? And Moses said, no, you still need to put a thread of blue. It's not good enough that your whole garment is blue. Now, it's understandable that the rabbis assumed that this conflict was about the thread of blue because, again, it was at the end of last week's Torah portion. Beginning of this week's Torah portion is the revolt of Korach. So they made the connection between these two things. That must have been what he was arguing about. But then they say, he also challenged Moses with another question. We're supposed to put mezuzahs on the doorposts of our house, which only have 2 paragraphs from the Torah, just 2 little paragraphs written on parchment, sticking on doorposts of the house. What if I have an entire Torah scroll in my house? Do I still need to put the parchment on the doorposts of my house? And Moses said, yeah, you still need to put the parchment on the doorposts of your house. Now, it's a little bit weird that Korach would have argued about that, because the commandment to put the parchment on the doorposts of your house doesn't appear until the book of Deuteronomy. And by the time we get to the book of Deuteronomy, Korach is already dead. But, so they must have come, why did they connect these 2 mitzvot together? The first answer to that question is the 2 mitzvot are both part of the Shema that we recite every day, twice a day. They're in the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. The first 2 paragraphs talking about putting a mezuzah on the doorposts. The 3rd paragraph talks about putting fringes on the corners of your garments. And so they connected these 2 ideas together. That, by the way, means that this midrash was written after those 3 paragraphs are put together as a unit, which we know is probably true because in temple times the priests would recite all 3 paragraphs as a unit. Midrash comes after the temple times, so they're connected. But the other reason I think these 2 commandments are connected is because they're both what we call mnemonic devices. They're both supposed to remind us of all of the commandments, right? In fact, that's exactly what it says at the end of the book of Numbers, in the chapter, the parsha from last week. You're supposed to put fringes on the corners of garments to remind you of God's commandments. And of course, when you put the mezuzahs on the doorposts of your house, it reminds you that when you leave your house and you pass by the mezuzahs on your doorpost, you're reminded, oh yeah, God wants us to be good. That's what this thing is reminding me. So I'm going out in the world, I have to be honest in my business dealings. I have to be fair, I have to be kind to the people I meet on the street, to the grocery store clerks, and the guy at the restaurant, whatever. So it's about being kind and fair and just. And when you come home, you pass by the same mezuzah on the doorpost, you come into your house, you have to remember to be nice to your family, amazingly enough. And so these things are mnemonic devices. They're supposed to remind us of all of the mitzvot. The Midrash makes Korach out to be someone with little sensitivity to the meaning and purpose of the commandments. He wants to make a garment entirely of blue. By the way, it's kind of a way of saying, look how important I am. I'm like royalty. I can wear a royal blue robe. I have enough money, right, to be able to buy one of these things, right? So I'm really important. The exact opposite of what putting the fringe on the corner of your garment is supposed to teach you, to be humble and modest and to follow God's ways. Same thing with putting a scroll in your house. Torah scrolls in the old days, you had to pay a scribe. As we know, Torah scrolls are expensive. And it's mostly because you have to pay a scribe to copy it out by hand on parchment. Right? Today, of course, books are much cheaper, you printing press and everything. But back then, it was very expensive. So Korach is saying, look, I got a whole house full of Torah scrolls. I'm so wealthy, I got a whole bunch of Torah scrolls. What do I need a little parchment on the house for? I'm so important. And exactly the opposite of what the mitzvah is supposed to be teaching us, to remind us to be good and kind. So Korach clearly did not understand the purpose of these two mitzvot, and the reminders are designed to teach us to live up to the standards of all the mitzvot on how we conduct our lives, and that, in turn, leads us to become a holy people. They're not reminders that we are holy, but reminders that we strive to become holy. Not only do we then act as God's agents in realizing the will of God here in our world, but by our actions and our belief that these actions are actually commanded by God, we proclaim that the world is indeed, that God is the creator of the entire world. He loves each human being as an individual person, and we should imitate God by loving our neighbors as ourselves. That's what it means to strive to be holy. That's the point that Korach didn't understand. And these two mitzvot that he used to attack Moses are designed to remind us of our mission. But for them to be effective, we must first put the talit on in the morning, and then remind ourselves as we look at the fringes of God's commandments. And we should notice the mezuzah that we put on our doorposts when we leave our house and when we come by, so that we will remember God's commandments, and then we will do the things that we're supposed to do, and that we will love God with all our hearts, with all our soul, and all our strength, and love our fellow human beings like ourselves. And if we strive to do all of that, we'll be striving to become a holy people. Shabbat Shalom.